Hey, Andrew with Evermore Studio here. Recently, I custom embossed some velvet with a Celtic key pattern design to make a pillow for my sofa. There's another video about that if you're interested. I'll put a link in the description. With some nice pieces left over, I thought it would be cool to make a drawstring bag. I've made several drawstring bags in the past. One really easy way to do it is to take a strip of fabric, fold it in half, stitch up two sides, flip the open side down, and stitch that up to make a channel for the drawstring. Quick and easy. Whoa! Hold up, Andrew. That embossed velvet was a lot of work. You should do something nicer with it. Maybe a fancier bag with a flat, circular bottom. I could even line it with a bit of this nice yellow silk I turned up. Oh, you know what would be neat? I could make a bottom out of leather. Even better, I could make it out of that faux leather and engrave it with a circular knotwork design. Do I even have a knotwork design like that? No, I did not. Since it's a bit of a detour, I tried to keep this fairly simple. I ran through sketching some quick variants of one of the most common knotwork forms. When I decided that would work, I figured out how many units would make a circle and built a custom polar grid to draw out the knot. After that, I made a quick run at a sketch to convince myself that it would work out right. There is a different way of constructing a nice clean digital version of a knot compared to a hand-drawn knot. So I switched to Inkscape and created a centerline version on my custom grid. I drew one unit, duplicated it to the adjacent areas, adjusted until everything aligned, and rolled the changes back to the prototype unit. There is a technique for weaving the line over and under to form the knot. It's pretty tedious to watch, but I can do another video on that if anyone is interested. I suspect that there are other videos out there covering it. Once the design was finished, I added my ambigram logo, zapped it into the faux leather, and cut it out. Time to make the bag. As I am making a lined bag, I start by making two separate bags. The bag that will be the lining gets cut entirely from the yellow silk. I lasered up some pieces of cardboard as a pattern. I started with the maximum length of a strip of the existing embossed velvet, made a guess at the height, rounded to an even iteration of the key pattern on the velvet, then sorted out the size of the circle with basic geometry. After sewing the strip into a tube, I pinned the circle to the bottom. It can be a little challenging because the silk stretches and it is difficult to get everything mathematically perfect. Once pinned, the circle gets sewn to the body. Clipping the seam allowances of the circle helps the fabric form a curve as desired. This will be even more critical with the heavier body and faux leather bottom. Making the bag exterior is essentially a repeat of the lining. I do leave a small bit of the seam on the main body open near the top, backstitching each side of the gap to reinforce it. This is where the drawstring will come out. Once the exterior and interior bags are done, one goes inside the other, with the outsides facing together. The two pieces are stitched together along the top opening edge of the bag, except for a little gap. The outside of the bag and the finished side of the lining get pulled out of the gap to turn it right side out. Then I top stitch the top edge of the bag, being careful to tuck the edges of the gap in so that the gap is not visible. Next, I sew a second line of stitching a little farther down to create a channel for the drawstring. Alright, now we just need a drawstring. I have some silver cord that I can use, unless... Wait, I have an idea. Many years ago, a friend introduced me to the Japanese art for making the braided cords used to hold together the plates of samurai armor. This is called Kumihimo. After having a brief go at it on my friend's equipment, I was very excited to do more, ordered a couple of books, and didn't touch it again for quite some time. A few years later, and still some years ago, my brother, who does quite a bit of really beautiful woodworking, made me a maru dai, the loom used for kumihimo. I ordered some tama, the bobbins used for doing kumihimo, and still did not do any braiding. I like the way the bag is coming out, and it really deserves a cool drawstring, so no time like the present. I ordered some proper Kumihimo floss in yellow and green to match the bag. The floss comes in long segments, each with more threads than I needed. I have to separate each bundle of threads, and they tangle really easily. It would help if there were some way to keep the end of one bundle in place while I was working on it. I bet I could make something for that. My design for the floss separator is just a little MDF T-stand with a sheet of EVA foam in the upright. I used a razor to cut the foam in the middle of each channel. A knot in the bundle of threads won't pull through the slot. As long as the floss separator stays in place, it'll hold the end of the bundle while I separate it. A cotton cord leader is used traditionally to help make optimal use of as much of the floss as possible. The floss is attached to the leader and rolled onto the tama. The simple pattern I chose for this requires 2 tama of each color. For braiding to work properly, there has to be a weight on the end of the developing braid that counters the weight of the tama. The traditional approach is to use a little drawstring bag. This was at risk of becoming a little recursive, so I just made a simple bag like I initially described. I have a supply of vintage and antique kimono in varying states of disrepair and disintegration. I grabbed a strip that had been part of a basic yukata and made a bag for the counterweights that is simple, but still has a little bit of character. In lieu of the traditional lead weights, I used some loose change in the bag. Onward! Getting set up was a bit fiddly. I started with knotting the 4 lines together at the ends. As recommended, I used a chopstick to hold everything in place during setup. There is a trick to hanging the tama so that they will stay in place but can be unrolled as you proceed with a little effort. It took some practice to get it consistently. Once the tama were hanging, I added the counterweight bag, removed the chopstick, and started the braiding. It was a little rough, and I made a few mistakes at first. Eventually, I settled into a rhythm, and the braid appeared more and more quickly. Great, I just need to put the drawstring into the bag. Oh, you know what would be neat? I should add some beads. Long ago I found some strands of skull beads in an import store. They appear to be hand-carved, probably out of cow bone. There's a fair amount of variation, with some looking significantly better than others. I picked a few, but immediately realized that the holes were too small for my Kumihimo cord. I clamped them down and used a rotary tool with a drill bit to make the holes larger. I thought gluing some red seed beads I had on hand into the eye sockets would add some additional character. I saw some really wonderful skull beads that were hand-carved by a Buddhist monk, and it made me think that some slightly more realistic skull beads would be interesting for a bag. For the moment, carving tiny wooden skulls is a bridge too far. I did, however, modify a 3D model of a skull to remove the lower jaw, and put a hole through it, then print some on the SLA resin printer and paint them. I didn't expect to have an immediate use for them. Then I ended up making a second bag. That's the one you will see me assembling in a moment, but they both went together the same way. The remaining beads are jasper, turquoise, black onyx, and copper. The holes were right on the edge of workable to get the needle with the cord through. I was able to widen the hole in the copper beads a little with an ice pick. For the stone beads, I just used brute force. With one end beaded, I pulled the cord through the channel in the bag with an elastic pulling tool, installed the beads on the other end, and was finally able to call it done. Here are the final bags. Despite getting kind of carried away with this quick project, these were a lot of fun. I might make some variants in the future. I hope you enjoyed the journey. Thank you for watching.